Hello, welcome to Factropy. This is going to be a quick demo, quick intro into the mechanics of the game and some of the reasons for the way it is. Hopefully allow people to get started. Before we start, just a quick overview of the setup. You start the game, you're automatically dumped into a new world. There's no opening screen. You can change a bunch of graphic stuff here. The game is meant to run on relatively new hardware, but you know, I have an older gaming laptop that it seems to quite happy on as well. You can change those details on the fly and pick what works for you. You can change some stuff about the world, grass, sand, depends on what you like to look at. Initially, it's designed to run at 60 UPS, 60 FPS, same as Factorio, for example, but it's decoupled. These are not tightly coupled together. You can specifically request that they are, if that's what you prefer, but on some hardware, it's good to have them decoupled so that the frame rate can adjust, particularly over long scenes, long views like that, without disrupting the speed of the simulation. Basic controls are right-click and move the mouse to move around. Normal keys for movement around the map. You're not tied to a specific character. You're not tied to the Zeppelin. You're free to move around. The Zeppelin is your basic construction unit in the early game. It comes with a bunch of construction supplies already, which you can use to get going. It's got a little beacon that appears on the ground beneath it, which tells it where its current waypoint is. If I right-click and move it, it'll fly around. That's worthwhile thinking about early on. If you hover over things and press spacebar, you can see the contents, or you can see more info about it. In this case, the contents of the Zeppelin, the oil content of the reservoir underneath lakes, and the ore content that is in each hill. Hills are the place where you do your mining. You can get most resources from any hill in different volumes. You don't need to go around and find specific patches for each one. So you can start from a single place and you pick a good hill that has what you want. So most of these it's not too bad. It's got a bit of everything. Not much lead though. Lead is something we need early on for solar and circuits and stuff, so we might want a bit more of that. Let's get a bit more. It's not too bad actually. It's got a little water supply nearby as well, so we could quite easily get our water for our steam and power generation. So we'll move the Zeppelin over here, mate. Come on. Let him come across, and we'll do our initial starter base here. While he's doing that, the map is actually discrete. It's not it's a fixed size. Doesn't go on forever, at least in this demo. That may change. You have it built in to allow it to extend in any direction, but for the moment it's a fixed size world that's pre-generated from a seed. It doesn't matter where you start. There's no natives to fight or anything like that. All of the combat happens in the skies later on with a high-tech enemy. So you can move the Zeppelin around and pick the right spot that you like. In the end, obviously, because hills have a finite ore supply, you're going to be expanding out and having logistics routes to transport materials around the map. So it doesn't really matter where you pick first, because eventually you're going to come back and say, well, I need that old hill that I started off nearby after all. Zeppelin has a yellow area of operations. He has 50 drones, little quadcopters that will construct, deconstruct, and generally follow any orders that you give using the materials that are in the Zeppelin. The game progression occurs via following a series of goals set by the, air quotes, Ministry of Defence in order to supply the war effort and defend the home world. It's all a bit abstract. It's a driver. It's something that will come into play more later as the enemy starts to appear. For the time being, the goals are really about kicking the game off and doing something of a tutorial. So first goal is to start mining, and to do that I have to construct one miner and mine some iron ore. Grab the miner. He's red, so he's saying he can't be placed out here. The back of the miner needs to go inside the hill. When you put him inside the hill, he goes green and says, yep, I can be built here. Hover over that, press the spacebar to see the materials that are going to be delivered by drone to that site to construct the entity. They would if the Zeppelin was in range. Come over here, buddy. The construction of entities requires delivering the intermediate materials to the site. There's no mall concept where you construct supplies of entities that can be put down in a single click. It requires a bit more thought about, first of all, it doesn't require a mall, but it also does require a bit more thought about distributing construction materials throughout the base. And the Zeppelin obviously is handling that for us early in the game. Got to mine iron ore. If I do complete this goal, incidentally, those are the things that I will unlock. I'll get belts and other mining stuff suitable for doing the next goal. So that's the driver of progression. As you do things, as you meet the requests of the MOD, then you will have more access to more technology and be able to do bigger and better things. All right, iron mining. Miners, because they mine hills that have many resources in them, they're not discrete resource patches with a single type of ore. You have to specify the recipe that they are going to follow. In this case, iron mining is the only one that's turned on because we're at goal number 1. I missed that. The iron miner just mined a bunch of stuff. He's got a little grey bar there in that pop-up which is saying that his inventory is full. He's got 10, I think he buffers 10 ore because his inventory has capacity for 10 kilograms. By the way, mass is important for items in this game. Smaller items have less mass and you can fit more of them within inventories. Stores, I suppose I should call them. Current goal is because I built the miner and I produced some ore, I now have to show I can collect it, and that's going to be requiring me to build some belts. So belts. Conveyor belts are probably pretty familiar to anyone who's played this sort of game by now. Spacebar, I can see what I can do with it. If I press R, I can rotate the thing, get the 4 cardinal directions. Okay. If I press C, I can cycle through different configurations. This is a bit different to the other games. In this case, nothing happens automatically. Belts don't automatically link up on corners. You specifically say, I want this to be a corner belt, and you cycle through like that. You can rotate corner belts as well. Obviously, they are their own entity, but you generally start off by rotating into position, then cycling through configurations. So for now, we'll build a straight belt in front of the output slot on the miner. The miners, like Satisfactory, I suppose, are the only one. They output directly onto the belts, but they're the only ones that do it. Most of the other entities, you will need to use arms, which will look a lot like inserters, strangely enough, in order to get things in and out. So that should allow me to complete the goal. I've now produced more than 10 iron, and you can see he's still buffering. And that's it. He'll only output onto one side of the belt, but that might change. Kind of makes more sense when the belts run sideways and you can do more balancing more easily, but when they're end on like that, it's a bit weird. Current goal, crushing. Alright, so the crusher has appeared down here. This guy. For those who have played Angels mods in Factoria, you probably recognise the crusher. The ore crushing step is discrete and intended to be that way. It produces both crushed ore and waste product, crushed stone. Overall, the recipes in Factory are probably going to be more complex than vanilla Factoria or vanilla Satisfactory from what I've seen. The numbers of items that we're using here per recipe, per entity are fairly high, and that's largely because we do the construction on site and the drones are handling it for us. It really doesn't matter how many different things we need to do it. We don't have to fit that logic all into a single mall or into our inventory when we're building it ourselves. I need to use an arm to get the materials into the crusher because he's a crafter. Should be fairly straightforward. You may have noticed that the little coloured cubes, green is input, red is output. So if you're rotating things around and get confused, the output is where it will end up. Like every entity here, you have to set a recipe. So he's going to do iron crushing. That means he will accept iron ore up to 5 for the recipe, and he'll output crushed iron, crushed stone. That will give him 5 crushed iron and 2 crushed stone per recipe execution. He's a crafter, so he will buffer internally up to 2 outputs. So 2 recipe runs will be buffered internally, then he'll stop because his internal stores are only about, well, they're limited in size. Hence the next goal. The next goal is to store products, and to do that we use a container, which has appeared down here. Containers are essentially chests, but they've been done a bit differently, intentionally so, in order to have a bit of a different style of gameplay. First of all, they're obviously like shipping containers. They are asymmetrical. They're longer than they are wide. That leads to more interesting layouts. It means that they can span multiple crafters more easily, and I personally feel that leads to a more interesting base in the long term, rather than having everything be a square. Another difference is that they require items to be explicitly allowed inside. I have seen that elsewhere. I forget which of the other games does that. The reason for that is that we'll get into that later. It's to do with the way the logistics networks work. Essentially, every container is a logistic container, so you need to be fairly explicit about what you put into and out of that logistic network. In this case, we know that the crusher is producing iron and crushed stone, so we will allow crushed iron and crushed stone into the container. We will allow more crushed stone than iron. The reason being, crushed stone is currently a waste product of the crushing process, which we can't process until we get a bit further through the goals. So we need a bit bigger buffer to store that. There he goes, and they'll be producing. They want us to produce 50 crushed iron. Cool. Awesome sauce. While that's happening, I guess we can look at the build screen. Those who've played games with avatars, Factorio, Satisfactory, even Dust and Sphere, are aware that they have inventories in the characters. There's no character here. You're essentially playing in creative mode, God mode type thing. You only have the Zeppelin. You can open the Zeppelin's inventory like any entity. You click on him and you can do things. The E key is linked to a build screen. The build screen is intended to be an overview screen. It's something like the recipe browser mods that appear for Factorio, the FNEI, I think it was equivalent. If in doubt, come here to see what to do. All the items that you have access to, all the recipes, all the structures and vehicles, and the current goal are all visible here. If you're unsure how to do something, like to say, all right, how am I going to get coal? And say, well, I'll click on the coal button in my goal. It expands the coal field, and I can see that it's produced by a recipe called coal mining, and it requires me to build a miner. Fair enough, I'll build a miner. Which is what we'll do. We'll actually stick him in there because we'll need coal for our smelting. The build screen is intended to be a left to right process. So you come in here and you can determine exactly what you need to do, what you need to do it, and how it will relate to your goals coming down the pipeline, without having to jump around all over the place or remember where you were or move through multiple screens. It's one place. You can see the cost of the recipes on the fly here, and you can see the energy consumption on the fly of the structures, and whether you've met the goals, all in one spot. If in doubt, press E. All right, new goal, smelting. Around here. The furnace should be relatively familiar. It's currently the only furnace in the game. There are plans for others to sort of based roughly on some of the extended smelting options that Angel did in his mods. For the moment, we have a vanilla furnace, and we have to select a recipe like every entity in this game. Steel smelting is going to consume crushed iron to produce a steel ingot. Now we have crushed iron in the container next to it, so an arm will allow us to access that. We use the second miner to mine coal from the same mountain / patch. That's plenty there to mean that you don't have to go hunting resources for a good long time. It will run out though. The mountain will get mined out, and you'll have to decide whether to flatten it with explosives or to build stuff on top. Later on there are entities that benefit from being up high, and whether to build around it, square it off, do what you like. Possibility also, actually, of potentially having train tunnels, but they aren't built yet. Alright, the smelter has some crushed iron, but he's not doing anything, and that's because he needs fuel, which you can see here in this incredibly poorly named screen that he needs chemical fuel, which I will have to extend that. Coal is chemical fuel, so we can use that. This is a chance to look at the blueprints, which there are none. There are no blueprints as such. There are plans, construction plans, which are able to be copied and pasted like this. But I can say I want to grab a whole lot of stuff and rapidly copy and paste that. It's the quality of life aspect of blueprints, but there's not the book. You don't save them. You don't put them in a book. You don't get to reuse them across games. I'm not sure what will happen in the long term with that. My personal opinion is that blueprints actually damage creativity. After you have a big book of stuff, you tend to just repeat your patterns, and you don't look at each new game as an opportunity to build something new. But we'll see how that pans out. Also, while we're on that, you can also obviously pipette the same way with Q. So single item pipette, multiple items, Control C to copy. There's no Control V at this point. There may be. Alright, so the smelter has already run while I was waffling, and he's produced 2 steel ingots. So because containers are large, you can stick a lot more stuff in one container and you can control it. So we'll say you're allowed to stick 50 ingots into that container, stick an output arm to extract them from the furnace, and we'll there we go. So they're appearing in the container now, and he's off. Just a note on the models here. The models are early days. I mean, look at this. This is too vertical to really see these little arms tucked in between there. That probably needs to be more angled and done in a little bit better fashion. So that will improve. But what can I say? It's a demo. Early days. Alright, that goal wants us to create 8 steel ingots. There's no iron stage, you might have noticed. You go straight from iron ore to steel. Steel costs a bit more to produce than some of the other metals like copper, but there's no iron step. Maybe that will change, it isn't clear yet. Iron itself is not inherently more useful to have. And we are intending to pretend to be a game where we're a relatively advanced culture that has managed to deploy someone to another planet to build war materials. So maybe raw iron isn't something we want. Excuse me, my throat's getting a bit. Okay. So goal is complete. Time to start crafting. Now that build screen, you can see the goals here as you progress through, and the current one is highlighted. So that allows you to do 2 things. It allows you to, well, first of all, see a bit more info than this pop-up, which you get from hovering up here. You can drill around and say, well, what am I getting for this? What am I building? Oh, I've got to build an assembler. It's going to cost me this stuff. You can also look ahead and say, oh, well, in the future, I know I'm building electricity, and then I'm getting ready to launch a rocket. Cool. So anywhere that you want to peek ahead and understand where your next tasks are going to be, go ahead and do so, because they may affect what you do this time around. So we'll open assembler and build an assembler next to the container that already has the materials that we want. I think, yeah, the assembler's building steel sheets It's the lowest of the low recipes, single input ingredient, single output result. So easy to get going. See, there's that model thing. I just tried to pipette that little guy in there, and I managed to get the crusher because its bounding boxes are interfering. Anyway, we'll fix that. Again, I'm going to put the steel sheets back in the same container. I can do that. I've got lots of space. The container's hardly got anything in it, so it's useful to have it all in one spot early on. And the reason why will become clear any moment now. So the assembler starts producing steel sheets. They start going into the container, and the Zeppelin starts sending drones. What is he doing? There's nothing to construct. And what he's doing is he's replenishing his steel sheet supply, which he used up building stuff, from this red container. And the container is red because it is a provider. He's a logistic entity. He has drones, so he can access the provider container to replenish his supply. And he'll do that to bring, I'll open it up, to bring the steel sheet count back up to the lower limit, which is 200. At least 200 steel sheets should be in the Zeppelin at all times if possible. So he's restocking. Once he's done, the number of steel sheets in this container will then steadily climb up to the 100 limit. So basically anything you produce and stick into a red provider container, a Zeppelin can utilise to replenish stores and do construction. Next goal is electricity, where we're building. Okay, electricity is back up. Right, for this tiny base, we've already actually been producing electricity. You can see it up here, and it's coming from the Zeppelin currently. The Zeppelin has a 3 megawatt internal power supply. It uses chemical fuel, solid fuel in this case, to run its generator, and it will generate electricity for the network. There is no poles and wires style network. It's just an RTS style electricity across the map automatically. The challenge is not in laying it out. The challenge is in keeping up with it. So the Zeppelin is currently our generator. The goal that it wants us to start producing boilers and pipes and steam engines in order to remove that load from the Zeppelin. The Zeppelin burns chemical fuel in order to generate electricity, and so the count of his solid fuel is going down. You can do that for a good long while, but eventually he's going to run out, and when he runs out, his generation stops and the base stops. Hence, it's a good idea to set up electricity at this stage. And to do that, we're going to do it down near the little lake here. We're going to need coal to run our boilers, so let's clear a path through. The way I did that was I clicked and dragged. There's no special tool for that. You can just click and drag at any time. You can release and the selection will stay there, and then you can choose what to do with it. In this case, I'm going to press delete to deconstruct all that junk there, and of course the Zeppelin sends out his drones to pick up that crap. Picking up logs and trees. He's got limits set for logs and stone already. They're set to 0, but the Zeppelin will pick up anything that it's told to pick up, even if it goes over its lower limit, so that its drones have somewhere to put those overflow materials. What it will do, though, is it will watch the containers that appear in the base, and as soon as it sees one that can receive logs or that can receive stone, it'll offload itself into those containers. So you can start pushing its waste resources into the network at the point that you actually have the capacity to do so. Let's extend the coal line, so click, drag, copy, paste, paste, paste. Nice long belt, and ooh, that was wrong. Select and get rid of those excess ones. The reason for creating steel sheets first should become evident now, and that is because the belt, the basic belt, the lowest level tier, requires a single steel sheet. So the earlier you construct them, the more freedom you have to start expanding the base without exhausting the Zeppelin supply of 200 sheets. So he's dropping off rapidly because he supplies constructions from his inventory for speed, and then he will only revert to resupplying when he runs out or he has spare drones to do so. So there he's resupplying already from that container. We might bump up that limit a bit so the buffer is a bit bigger. belts really consume steel. Alright, so that belt will give us coal, which is coming along, and we can start building our power supply. Offshore pump. Clue is in the name, it goes offshore. Offshore is anywhere. It's hard to see on the green. Change it to sand. You can see that where the terrain is not flat, the build grid stops. So offshore items can't be built on the grid, they have to be built off the grid, which is by default over water. Now, even though the water only renders to that height, they can be built anywhere. The elevation is less than 0. So we'll build an offshore pump there. And sand isn't too bad, we'll leave that for a while. Now, one thing to note about this guy, this is a bit of a place where the game is still pretty crude, a bit hard to work with. He's got a little blue cube at the side there. That's the pipe output. Eventually it will look a whole lot better and be a lot more obvious, but for the moment, if you see a little blue cube, that means that a pipe can connect. Pipes themselves have blue cubes to show you where they will connect. So we'll put in a pipe to bring the water in. Pipes are like belts. If you hover in spacebar, you can see that you can cycle through configurations with different connectors. It's hard to see behind the pop-up anyway. Or you can rotate with R, cycle, rotate. You can also page up and page down to get underground pipes and normal pipes. For the moment though, we just need a straight pipe. Spacebar on any extant non-ghost pipe will show you the network that he's part of. So in this case, he's part of a water network that has a 900 litre capacity. That's 900 litres because each pipe has 100 litres and the offshore pump has an internal reservoir too. The capacity of the network is the sum of the parts. It's also a bit magic. Entities can get fluid from the network without considering things like proximity or friction. So at the moment, if this guy, which this boiler has little blue ones as well, so he's hooked up to that pipe network, he's now part of the water pipe network and he's got access to 1,000 litres, even though his internal reservoir is smaller. Anyway, it's easy. For the moment, it's easy. Now, this guy had a blue output. Pipes have a... press my own buttons. Pipes have blue outputs because they link together. Entities that craft or that produce something have other coloured outputs, in this case red. Whenever you have a recipe, water to steam in this case, which takes a fluid input, the input can come in through a blue, or later you might see a green input, and outputs come out through the red, so the steam will come out through the red. We'll stick a pipe on the back there for him to output into. Now he's got steam already that he's created for boiling water, and you can see it goes down as he outputs that into the little pipe at the back. And the steam engine also has pipe inputs, so it can be part of a pipe network, and we'll stick it there. And as soon as he joins that network, this guy should start outputting steam. It drops right off as his steam gets output into this pipe network here, of which both the steam engine and the pipe are a member. Steam engines produce a megawatt, so we'll have another one of them. These technically, in the ratio, I believe the boiler is a 2 megawatt thing, so it can keep 2 steam engines supplied, but usually you want to slightly overestimate so that there's never a situation where, because these are discrete crafters that are boiling and then emitting, they're not constantly generating steam, you want to slightly overestimate a bit so that you don't get into a situation where these guys run out of steam waiting for the next shipment. That might change. These might become steady output. The pump is a steady output. It generates water every tick. The boiler may do that in the future, but currently doesn't. Interestingly, it turns out that actually helps later on. If you get to the stage where... Why is that not hooked up? Messed up. If you get to the stage later where the base is not keeping up with the electricity drain and the steam is running out, it can be easier to recover if your boilers are injecting discrete volumes, large volumes of steam every now and again rather than a steady supply, because it kind of jolts everything back into action. Anyway, that's an area to be reviewed. Alright, that goal of generating electricity is now complete. So we've got some new stuff, one of which is a rocket. And the current goal is to prepare for launch. As I said before, the driver behind the game is to launch products to supply the war effort. That's the equivalent of the Satisfactory Space Elevator, the equivalent of Factorio's Science Pack resource drain. So in this case, we build rockets. We build them early, we build them often, and we fly them a lot. Partly because that's cool, and partly because it also feeds into the way the combat works later with the enemy in the sky. So the rocket runs on hydrazine, what this model does. Hydrazine requires production in a chemical plant with some inputs, so including water. So we're going to build the rocket relatively close to the water. Doesn't really matter where. You'll notice he's got little blue input-output points. It's because he will be part of a pipe network consisting of hydrazine instead of water. Once he's constructed, a little bit more expensive to construct, but as we know from Mr. Musk and his Starship, you can build rockets out of anything these days, as long as it consists of some sort of stainless steel. So we got a rocket, and he is empty, 0 litres of fuel, which if you look in here is hydrazine. He needs to be full of hydrazine, which is 5,000 litres of hydrazine. Chemical plant is where we produce hydrazine, and it's obviously also where we discuss input and output of fluid, because those are those little green indicators that I mentioned. Red is going to output hydrazine, green is going to input water for its recipe. So the recipe, input of water. This is a water network, and I want to hook it up to that water input there. Corner pipe. Grab the whole lot. One of the little annoyances of the pipe network at the moment is you can't fast replace. You have to, if you want to make a join that you haven't planned for, you have to deconstruct. Pick the right variation and paste it back in, and the robots will join it back up again. In the meantime, these networks are disconnected, but they retain their fluid, so you don't tend to get into huge troubles. Chem plant now has lots of water. It's the sum of the network, which is 3,000 litres of water access, needs logs. Hydrazine is how you get rid of your early excess of logs. As I said before, the Zeppelin was collecting them when it was deconstructing stuff. It's got 60, but it would prefer to have 0. So if I build a container down here, I set the container to allow log, lots of log, as many as you want, the Zeppelin will start immediately offloading his logs to that container. So it frees up space in the Zeppelin, gets rid of some of the junk, and gets them in the right place for use in producing hydrazine. Now this guy is going to output his, when he starts, there it goes, he's off. When he generates hydrazine initially, it will buffer slightly, and then he'll try to output it. It's going to be through one of these red outputs. Now, if you have recipes with single fluid output, it's fine. You just pick a red connector and join a pipe up, and away you go. Later on, as you get recipes with multiple fluids in the outputs, it gets more complicated. You have to use valves and the like to control where it comes out. But for the moment, we can just whack a pipe straight on there, and because he's got an input next to it, we just join them up, and that will allow the chem plant to output its hydrazine directly into the, there we go, hydrazine in the rocket, 200 litres. That'll take a while. Might need a few more trees too. So this goal is largely about showing you can handle fluid production and fuel the rocket. You don't actually have to do anything else with it. So once you've got it set up, got a bit of leisure to prepare for the next thing, which is supplying of samples. They're going to want us to supply, which means launch in the rocket, some copper and some steel ingots. Now earlier I produced steel ingots, but I haven't produced any copper, so we're going to have to replicate that now for copper. So pipette and create another miner, because I do have copper in this hill, I really hope. Yes, I do. And we'll duplicate the basic layout for smelting, which is perfectly fine for now, to produce some copper. Now, when I copied that crusher there as a multi-entity plan, it copied his recipe as well. So he's on iron crushing, and this guy's going to be on iron crushing too, which I don't want. I want him to start off on copper crushing. And this guy, I want him to mine some copper. It's going to work. Yep. As with that one, I need to configure what I'm allowed, what he's allowed to put into this. So we're going to say that he will be allowed to put in crushed stone, he will be allowed to put in crushed copper, and he will be allowed to put in copper ingots, or this guy will be allowed to put in copper ingot. And set him to copper smelting. Give these guys some upper limits so they can kick off, and give the stone a big upper limit. And away we go. And away he goes. He's smelting copper, and we have copper ingots being produced. Cool. Now, once this, my logs keeping up. Might need a few more. Logs are obviously the way. Hydrogen is obviously the way to get rid of the crap, to deal with the trees. There are lots of trees, luckily, so you can produce lots of hydrogen. Later on, you can build bigger things like a starship and fuel it from electrolysis, liquid oxygen from the lakes directly. You don't have to rely on trees forever. Mix and match as you prefer. Alright, so once he gets to that level, my next goal is going to be to supply samples, which means I need to get some samples from up here down to the rocket. This was the trade-off between building the rocket near the water so you can fuel it, versus building the rocket near the starter base so you can stoke it, insert to it. Either way, I mean, this way I have to build a belt to get it down there, that way I would need a pipe to get the fuel up there. This seems like it's more static. This is the sort of the area that the power generation is probably going to expand for a while. That is too small to do anything useful, so that is probably going to get torn apart and turned into some smelting arrays. So this seems like a good static spot for the rocket. There we go, we'll take the supplies down there. Now, because I have no character, I can't just grab them. I can't go up there and say, give me 10 of them, 10 of them. I can't even really use a Zeppelin to do it unless I fiddle around with containers to get him to use his drones to balance between them. So what we'll do is we'll pull them out with a temporary belt scaffold. A couple of arms to extract things from these containers. Now, because the containers have multiple things inside, I don't want the arms to just extract anything. Arms have a filter operator. There's no discrete filter inserter, filter arm equivalent. You can do that to any arm. You can also connect it up to networks and circuit stuff later on, but control where it puts stuff. But for the moment, what we really want to do is say to this arm, you shall only extract copper ingots from that container, and you shall only extract steel ingots from that container. So we'll grab a small supply of those onto belts. Now I could just do this all with belts. Obviously once I think that'll give me slightly more than 10 each, but it'll give me enough anyway to meet the target for the goal. We'll get to we'll use this opportunity to demonstrate something that's a little bit different in factropy compared to the other games. This tube thing popped up as a reward for our last goal. A tube is essentially a belt combined with a pneumatic tube. So this little jet engine here will suck up items from there, send them through the tube and put them back down there. It's the three-dimensional thing. Now tubes can come in multiple heights. You can do them, they can come with and without conveyors, so you can send tubes all over the place in a way that belts can't be done. So with this, as you can possibly imagine, you can start the three-dimensional aspects of the game. One of the things to note actually is that these guys, which if I link to him with L, these guys can go on hills as well, all the way. And don't switch screens, that's a silly idea. Okay, that's obviously a little bit of a bug. That's choosing the position on the hill from the position on the flat ground, not on the top of the mesh. So that's why I switched windows there inadvertently. Anyway, you can see that tubes can turn your base into a three-dimensional thing, which in a way that belts cannot. I guess they could be considered a combination of the belts in Satisfactory, which can go at heights and angles and over rough terrain and whatnot, and the belts in Factorio, which can't. They combine the two in a way that makes it interesting and looks a bit different. So we will use one of those guys to get our supplies down to the rocket. Now, the initial, notice here I'm cycling through them. It's because there's no point having a conveyor underneath an intermediate tube. I really just want a tower so that C will allow me to choose which variant of the tube I want. They also have a relatively limited span early on. That's as far as the first level tube go. There are higher level tubes that you can upgrade to later, which will have longer spans, potentially higher heights. I'll bring him down here, cycle back to a conveyor to get that material out. Now tubes take a bit, what do they cost? They cost electric motors, which is the main expense for them early on. Other than that, they're not much different to a belt or a normal early entity. But the electric motors you have a finite supply of, and you have 50 of them when you start off in the Zeppelin. The production of electric motors is potentially a little ways away. You're going to have to set up some infrastructure to do that. So you can't go overboard with tubes early on, but you can have some fun. And we'll do that now. So start there, cycle to the other, and bring it down. Rocket's in the way. And put him there. So because I built those tubes in that direction from starting here and moving down, that's the direction that they flow. There's not actually currently any indicator to show which way, for example, this tube operates. That'll have to change, be a bit more obvious, but for the moment they operate in the order that they are built. Although that is preserved in plans or blueprints, so those guys there do automatically retain their direction. So you shouldn't be too confusing, providing you're thinking about the order in which you build stuff. I probably don't want all of that, so let's get rid of that. Go away. You can delete stuff that's half constructed. It just switches the limits there and tells the drones, okay, you've got to go back and pick up those materials that you faithfully dropped off. Sorry about the bother, guys. And they don't care in the least. All right, let's hook up the tube. Actually, I might stop extracting materials because I don't want to waste too many. And there's a bug. They've gone far too fast down there. Obviously, I've messed up something there in the code, which isn't surprising. They were a relatively recent addition, so not recent addition. They were recently tweaked in order to be generated slightly differently. So you can see, look at that, they're flying far too quickly. It means there's an order of magnitude problem with the, why is he not being built? Brick. I've ran out of bricks. No bricks. Dear Lord, I've got no bricks. Alright, in order to finish this, we'll just delete some stuff because I can reclaim the bricks from there and at least get the rocket to launch. And then hurry off and fix up those tube bug, so those items flow along them in a much nicer fashion. There we go, bricks being reclaimed from the deconstructed furnaces and crusher, and then being redeployed to complete the tube. There you go, the super fast items. There must be a whole zero missing in the speed for that thing. And we'll set the limits to allow the rocket to receive its materials. All right, 10 and 10 ingots being inserted. As you can see from the pop-up, the hydrazine is already fully stoked, so we've got 5,000 litres ready to go. Now the rocket, if it were full completely in its storage, it would just take off by itself, but it doesn't. Early on you need to tell it when you want it to do that, otherwise it tends to make off with things that you don't want it to launch. I could, I suppose, stick all my crushed stone in there and launch it into the sun and be done with it, but it's something of a resource sink. For the moment, we want to launch. We'll click launch, and that will animate the rocket. There it goes. Takes off. He will complete his flight and he'll land again. Much like we've seen certain well-known rockets landing recently in the last few years. When he does land, the cycle will complete and the supply totals, the shipment that I've sent to orbit, will update and the goal will complete. Here he comes, landing, finishing up, and goal is complete. So now we're on to defense. I won't go too much further today. Obviously I now have some tube bugs that I want to go and fix, but I will show a couple more things. One is this gun turret, which is also missing a head. Look at that, that's popped up. Gun turrets are necessary as you progress past the next few goals. As soon as you start supplying materials that are really make a difference in the war effort, like ammunition, which actually gets shot at people, the enemy starts paying attention, and the enemy attacks from the sky. He sends missiles and asteroids and stuff down at you, and you have to use your gun turrets and your laser turrets later to shoot them out of the sky. And starts looking a little bit like a World War II barrage situation with lots of bullet trails in the sky and the like, which is kind of cool. Build gun turrets, stick them around the place, build ammunition to allow them to fire, and you can see that actually the next goal is to start supplying ammunition, so it forces you to get that infrastructure working and going into orbit. One last thing I will say, if someone does get well ahead of the game, it's only a demo, but it does have some of the bigger goals in it, and that is that once you get past these two initial goals where you're just supplying a fixed number of things to show that you get to these four at the end, the sustainment, complexity, expansion, and bulk. They start turning into rates of supply. So 5,000 ammunition per hour for 3 hours. They're demonstrating to your superiors back home on Earth that you can supply things reliably over a fixed period of time. They force you to think about the base, get the scaling right, get the balancing right. Rather than building up a big buffer of something and then rapidly launching it to meet goals, you have to show that you can do it over a period of time. I presume that also they get more complex each time. They get harder, and you finally get up to some quite big targets, which I know that doesn't look big necessarily, but the fact that it's uranium ammunition and requires a whole nuclear processing line to get 10,000 per hour for 5 hours, it's probably about as big as this game can currently get with the current engine. So we'll have to look at how those break up in the future. But anyway, you will need to be of a certain mindset, be the sort of player that likes to do things like rockets per minute, likes to balance the base, likes to think about how they can get up to the next level without necessarily with a fairly long pipeline of work. All right, I won't waffle any further. That's factropy. I hope you have a go. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any bug reports, like for example tubes that work way too quickly, feature requests, feedback, whatever you like, whack it on the itch.io page for now, or in the GitHub issues. Very much appreciated. I'm a solo dev, so any feedback is probably good because this is very much skewed towards the way my brain works. All right, awesome. Thank you for listening and have fun.